What a headshot! What a head!
How's it, guys? This is Dayvy, FPL, and welcome back to the Fantasy Premier League video here on my channel. Now in this video, I'm going to take you guys through all the Spurs assets. We have had the news that Conte will be taking over as the manager of Spurs, and that has lifted us up a bit about these Spurs assets, given us a little bit of hope in terms of are these players actually going to be good FPL options over these next couple game weeks. Throughout this video, I'll be taking you through the regulars, Harry Kane, Heung-min Son, while also providing you some other positions that potentially could give you guys the upside over those mini league rivals. So that's something you guys are interested in? Sit back, relax, and let's get straight into it. So the first talking point I wanted to just talk over is going to be the fixtures from a Spurs point of view. So not only do we have this new manager bounce, you guys know us FPL managers love a new manager bounce. I think it's basically just an excuse to maybe consider some other options from an FPL point of view. But nevertheless, there has been some historical kind of manager bounces that have been quite legendary. So hopefully the Spurs one and the Conte one is kind of up to scratch of those. But in terms of the fixtures, we can look from game week 10 onwards. Spurs have really nice fixtures. Not only do we kind of have this new manager bounce, but we also do have the fixtures. And you guys know me, I am a fixture FPL manager, and you can see that lovely sea of green from game week 11 onwards. But not only game week 11, game week 10 against Everton, although it is an away game, Everton have been really dismal from a defensive point of view. And I do think the likes of Harry Kane and Heung-min Son can exploit those defensive vulnerabilities and get you a couple of goals even in this upcoming game week. Game week 16 to 18 look a little bit hit or miss there. I mean, Liverpool defensively haven't been as good as they have been in past seasons. And then we also have Leicester in there who haven't been that great as well. So I do think the Spurs fixtures for at least the medium term future look super strong. And I would probably recommend getting at least one of Heung-min Son or Harry Kane. But which one to go for? Hopefully we'll uncover that a little bit later on into this video. Let me know in the comments down below, do you guys think that these fixtures are the best, at least for the short term, or do you think there might be another club that could potentially rival Spurs? But now going on to the king, the Italian king, Conte, a really good manager, has kind of proven it with Chelsea, taking them from 10th in the table all the way to 1st in the Premier League, winning the Premier League in the 2016/17 season. And yes, that season was special from a Chelsea point of view, but it was also special from my point of view because it was the season that I actually started playing FPL. Now, from my knowledge, the first season of FPL was a complete blur to me, so I honestly can't tell you guys whether Conte had a big impact, whether I was going for those Chelsea options or not. As I said, I can't really remember that far, but I will be giving you guys the stats of those previous seasons and kind of analyzing how Conte was so successful in his Chelsea and Inter Milan days. But the news has broken a couple of hours ago as I'm recording this video that Conte will be taking over Spurs. A little bit of a weird one, to be honest. Conte usually comes into a side with plenty of transfer funds, kind of wants to win in the immediate future, not really a long-term manager. But apparently Daniel Levy has promised Conte quite a large transfer budget coming up in that January transfer window. So at least up until Jan, we can get these players in that we currently are in the starting 11 for Spurs. But maybe after Jan, we might have to switch some of these players out because new players will be transferred in. But in terms of Conte, as I mentioned in the introduction, really do like him as a manager, and I am actually really excited not only from my own personal point of view, but also if you guys do support Spurs, I think that he's probably going to lift that club quite strongly, and the new manager bounce should also be quite strong. Now in terms of Conte, when he has started at these new clubs, usually gets them off to quite a fast start. With Chelsea when he came in for that 2016/17 season, I think they won 7 or 8 of their opening 10 fixtures. However, these fixtures were against slightly easier opposition. But I mean, Spurs' fixtures are against easier opposition, so I'm expecting Spurs to do quite well. Also, let me know in the comments down below what you guys think about Conte at Spurs. If you are a United fan, might be a little bit disappointed because apparently he was #1 on the United managerial list after Oli, if Oli got sacked or not. El Sakiko finally did deliver after Nuno Santos getting sacked after United beat Spurs 3-0 in game week 10. But before we get into kind of the analysis of Conte and Spurs as a whole, I want to just give a little bit of a disclaimer here. All these stats will be taken from previous seasons that Conte has been the manager at Chelsea and also Inter Milan. And right off the bat, Spurs are not Chelsea or Inter Milan. I'm not saying that they don't lack the quality of these two clubs, but I do think if you look at kind of like for like positions, I think both these two sides might be slightly stronger than Spurs are at the current moment. Not taking anything away from Harry Kane or Heung-min Son, you'll see that they kind of directly replace some of the other options that Conte has had at the blue clubs of Chelsea and also Inter Milan. But in terms of Spurs, I'll be kind of doing my best best analysis on them as possible, but please just remember that we can't necessarily take how Conte has done in his previous seasons and translate it directly to Spurs. But now that we got that out the way, the disclaimers out the way, let's focus on the stats and see maybe how Conte is going to set up at Spurs. So before we get onto the formations that Conte likes to play, I wanted to just give you guys some stats from the Premier League website about Conte's time at Chelsea. So at Chelsea, he was the manager for 76 games, which resulted in 51 wins. In terms of a win percentage, that's relatively high. However, this was Chelsea Football Club. Although they did finish 10th in the previous season, I do think that Chelsea carries that kind of stature. And historically, they have been quite a big club, so you would probably want that win percentage to be quite high. So this might be a little bit of a natural kind of win average, although it was a massive improvement over the previous season. In those 76 games managed, he managed to get 147 goals for Chelsea, or at least Chelsea scored 147, and then they conceded 71 in total. Now, a little bit of a disclaimer as well on these stats is that these were over kind of 2 seasons. Conte managed Chelsea in the 16/17 season, and then also managed them for the 17/18 season. If memory serves me right, in the 2016/17 season, they finished first in the Premier League, but in the season after that, I think they finished 5th. So I actually did combine both these seasons because I don't really want to have a small sample size. I want to show you guys the true Chelsea under Conte and give you guys the best stats as possible. So now moving on to those goals and goals against, I wanted to translate this into per game averages. So basically under Conte, Chelsea scored 1.93 goals, and then they also conceded 0.93. And then what I did was I took Man City's previous season, so that was going to be last season for Man City, obviously winning the Premier League, as I wanted to give you guys some metric about how these numbers actually compare. Because if you're just looking at the numbers, 1.93 might not be that impressive, but when you do compare it to Man City's averages, who are quite a free-flowing, high-scoring team, and they managed to get 2.18 goals per game in the prior season. When we move on to the defensive stats, Man City averaged 0.86 goals conceded per game, which is going to be lower than Chelsea. However, as I mentioned, this was Chelsea's kind of over 2 seasons, and in the second season they did finish overall 5th. So overall, these stats might not be that great from an FPL point of view, but I just wanted to show you guys kind of what you can expect under Conte if they're going to replicate the Chelsea side from the 2016 to the 2018 end of season. But now moving on to a talking point that definitely will be replicated in FPL, or at least useful for FPL, and that's going to be the formations that Conte does favor. So the first one is going to be the Chelsea formation. I think this was taken from the 2016/17 season, as there might have been some variation in the next season. So in terms of the 2016/17 season, Conte loved to play this 3-4-2-1, or you guys can call it a 5-2-2-1, whatever you guys want to call it. There might be some different FIFA formations that you guys can translate it to, but what I like to think is a 5 at the back, then 2 holding midfielders, and then a 3 up front. You can see that on the left and right wing, they played quite attacking options, and these could maybe rotate to a central position, almost playing as a left forward or a right forward, and I think this is going to be perfectly accompanied by the likes of Heung-min Son. Up front in that season, we had Diego Costa, and I mean, you can just substitute a Harry Kane right in there, almost one of these more physical options, not really that much of a pacey forward, and I think he's going to translate quite well in this Conte formation. In terms of what I'm expecting, probably Heung-min Son on the left and then Lucas Moura on the right. And then we do have the 2 holding midfielders, which you don't really know who's going to be, but I definitely can tell you in terms of the back 5, we do have some estimations. That's the one thing about Conte's lineups that he always does like favoring is these full back positions, or these wing backs. And we'll be touching on them a little bit later on. You can see Marcos Alonso here at that left wing back slot had one of the more historic, legendary seasons. If you guys did play FPL over the past couple of seasons, you'll know how much of an attacking fullback kind of Alonso is, and he's almost replicated that form at the start of this Premier League season. At the right wing back slot, we do have Victor Moses, who was historically kind of a winger. So this does show that Conte isn't really scared of playing a winger in that defensive slot. So maybe keep your eyes on that, but I do think that kind of Spurs have enough fullbacks and wing backs to accompany these 2 positions. In terms of the 3 at the back, this might be a formation that we haven't really seen Spurs play in the past, and I think these spots will probably pick each other, whereas those centre midfield slots, I'm a little bit unsure, and that's why I do think I'm willing to give myself maybe 1 or 2 game weeks to just see how Conte is going to set up so that I can manage to bring in the players that have the best positions in terms of this kind of lineup. This kind of brings me back to that disclaimer where Spurs are not Chelsea. I mean, just look at those 2 midfielder slots. We have Matic and then also Conte, kind of in both of their primes. These 2 holding midfielders were absolutely sensational, and I can't really translate this to that Spurs lineup. But as I did mention, I can easily substitute some of those Spurs options in, and I would kind of recommend that you guys do this if you want to bring a Spurs asset in before game week 11. And now to give you guys some variation, I also wanted to show you what happened with Inter Milan. when Conte did come into that lineup. And yet again, you can see this back three or back five, whatever you guys want to call it. But now we see a little bit of a rotation there with the front two. So a lot of people have been kind of referring to this formation on FPL Twitter and saying that they think that Heung-min Son and Harry Kane will make up those two forward positions. But we're just going to have to kind of see what Conte does play. I do think that the safest options to go for will be a Harry Kane or a Heung-min Son, just because if they will play a 3 up front or maybe a 2 up front, both those options will definitely be in that kind of starting 11. The only thing I will say is if they do play this front two, I do think that the Martinez and Lukaku combination will be fulfilled by a Heung-min Son and a Harry Kane. It's just going to be whether to see if Harry Kane's more of the holding forward and kind of plays those balls in behind for Son, or what we're going to kind of see with that front two. The formation I do think will be quite key to selecting which option you guys want to go for. I do think if Conte plays a front two, I think that Heung-min Son will be a little bit more of an attractive option just because he comes in slightly cheaper and will be playing out of position as a midfielder playing as a striker. I do think this formation might be slightly more suited to the likes of Spurs, just because in terms of that midfielder slot might be slightly more favored to a centre mid slot, whereas in the previous formation, those midfielders might have had to do some more defensive work. Yet again, we see these left and right wing-back slots, Perisic playing at that left wing-back slot, which yet again shows you that Conte doesn't really mind playing a winger at that left or right wing-back slot. But then with Hakimi, obviously more of a traditional defender, so he fit right into that lineup and had a relatively good season under Conte. And that was mainly the reason why he was signed by PSG in this last transfer window. But now go on to the first kind of positional highlight that I want to show you guys, and that's going to be all about these wing backs. And that's really where I think the potential for this Conte lineup really does lie, and that's going to be in the wing back slot. So what I did was I looked at the wing back slots over these couple seasons under Chelsea and Inter Milan that Conte has managed, and I brought up their stats from those seasons. So the first one is going to be Alonso, a player that us FPL managers really do know, kind of a legend in the FPL game just because of his attacking threat. And you can see in the 2016/17 season as well as the 17/18 season, Alonso did manage a couple goals and assists. The total number was exactly the same over these two seasons. It's just kind of been replaced. Instead of 6 goals and 3 assists, it now was 7 goals and 2 assists in the next season. And you guys can see the goals on the left or in the green and the assists on the right in the blue. I also wanted to include Victor Moses, however he did rotate with Pedro in the next season, so that's why I only focused on him in the one season, and he managed to get 3 goals and 3 assists in that specific season. We then move on to the Inter Milan fullbacks or wingbacks, and you can see that Hakimi was definitely the standout option. And why I wanted to highlight this player in specific is that when we look at Alonso, he was a left wingback, but with Hakimi, he's a right wingback. So in terms of positional play, either on the left or the right, doesn't seem to matter too much under Conte, and I don't really think that we can favor specific side just because that's what Conte does prefer. With Hakimi in that 2020/2021 season, definitely the highlighted wingback, managing 7 goals and 8 assists. And really, if you do look at the Spurs price points in terms of the defenders, that could be really good value for money if they do replicate those specific stats. We then move on to the other Inter Milan wingbacks. Perisic, a little bit of an underwhelming returns there in terms of that season. As kind of a winger, you would have expected his attacking returns to be off the charts, but unfortunately that wasn't the case with only 4 goals and 3 assists. So as you guys can see, in terms of the attacking returns, not really as high as one of the more premium defenders like a Trent Alexander-Arnold, who I think one season managed about 15 assists. But in terms of the price point that these Spurs options come in, you can get any Spurs wingback at 5.0 million or less. And talking about those wingbacks, I have nailed it down to 3 options that we can consider. On the left-hand side or the left wingback slot, we do have Reguilon. He has been rotating with Ben Davies, but I think under the new manager, he definitely will prefer Reguilon just because of that attacking threat. And that's why I think at 5.0 million is probably the safest option to go for. We then move on to the right wingback slot, and we do have the newly signed Emerson that has come into that Spurs lineup and has started basically every game under Nuno Santos. So I do think that will continue under the likes of Conte, but we also could have Doherty here that might rotate with him occasionally. Now this is kind of one of those 50-50s that I do think, although I do think it's more of a kind of 70-30, I do think Emerson is the favorite option to go for, but maybe Conte comes into training, likes the look of Doherty, and then he starts him. So that's why if you guys can afford to maybe give 1 or 2 game weeks to just kind of assess the situation there, just remember that Conte is coming into a new side, so you might play completely different starting 11s in these opening 2 fixtures, or you might kind of stick with one. We don't really know how it's going to set up, so that's why I would maybe go for a Son or a Kane if you really want to, and then maybe wait 1 or 2 game weeks before bringing in the likes of Reguilon, Emerson, or Doherty. I think the most expensive is going to be Reguilon at 5.0. We then have Emerson at 4.9, and then Doherty comes in at 4.7. So relatively cheap. We did look at the stats of the goals and assists, and if they kind of replicate those stats, I think they will be good value for money, and I think if they provide anything more than that, will be absolutely sensational FPL gold. And the final talking point I want to go over is going to be the attack, and I don't really want to spend too much time on here because I've already covered what I have to cover. Heung-min Son, Harry Kane, the most nailed kind of attackers to go for. It's just kind of choosing which one to go for, and right now it's really hard to choose which one to go for just because of that formational change. If they do start at 2 up front, I do favor the likes of Son, but if they start with a kind of center forward and 2 wingers, then maybe Harry Kane provides better value for money. If you guys really want me to kind of combine these two, if you have enjoyed this video, I just want to see how much hype this video has, but if you guys really want me to cover Son versus Kane, I will cover it in the ultimate guide coming up in a couple days time. So just drop it down below in the comments if you want me to do an in-depth comparison about Harry Kane versus Heung-min Son. There obviously are other options to go for. A Lucas Moura could be someone that fits in, but I would really recommend just waiting and seeing on that one to just see what formation Conte does go for, because if he does go for a front 3, Lucas Moura 100% at that right wing's position, but if they do start at 2 up front, I don't really know how Lucas Moura does fit into that kind of diamond in midfield. But let me know in the comments down below if you guys have moved early, if you couldn't really wait for the deadline, who did you bring in? Are you currently preferring Heung-min Son, or are you preferring the English striker Harry Kane? But this basically wraps the video, guys. Hopefully you did enjoy it. Please don't forget to like it if you did, and subscribe if you have not subscribed yet. Did mention the ultimate guide. Drop any comments you guys want me to cover. I always do look at your guys' suggestions for that ultimate guide, as that's more of a kind of general video, whereas the team selection coming up tomorrow or on Thursday will be more based on my own team. But I'm signing off. It's been Dayvy FPL, and I'm out. Cheers. Bye.